Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. Syrian President Ahmed Ashara denounced on Monday what he called, quote, continuous Iranian attempts to destabilize Arab capitals and interfere in the core of Arab national security. Shara made the comments at a virtual summit with Middle Eastern and European leaders. He further condemned the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure, saying these two actions, quote, directly endanger global economic stability. Those remarks are a reference to Iranian attacks on Gulf energy and other sites, and Tehran declaring the Strait of Hormuz, where about a fifth of global oil traffic flows through, closed in response to the American and Israeli strikes. Shara also praised Lebanese President Joseph Aoun for his efforts to disarm Hezbollah at the summit, as well as on a Tuesday call with the leader that focused on border security. The statements are representative of Syria's wider regional strategy in this war, pledging solidarity with regional states and exerting efforts to insulate itself from the violence. In this episode, I'll be going over how Syria is navigating the war and the potential impacts the conflict could have on the country. We'll hear from Rhonda Salim, a fellow at the SAIS Foreign Policy Institute and notable expert on the region, and Charles Lister, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and leading Syria expert. Hope you enjoy. Okay, let's start by going over what's going on in Syria with regards to the ongoing regional conflict. Syria is actually one of the more stable countries in the Middle East right now, at least in terms of the effects from the Iran war. And that's because Syria is not directly participating in the fighting. They aren't on the side of Iran, of course, or the US, or Israel, or the Gulf, at least not formally, and haven't been targeted by any of the warring parties. Syria did send reinforcements to its borders with Lebanon and Iraq recently, but this was more preventative. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a United Kingdom-based war monitor, reports that debris from projectiles falls regularly in Syria, primarily in the south. But as far as I've seen, they haven't reported any casualties. The observatory attributes many of these hits to Israel downing Iranian drones and missiles. School in the south, however, has been closed since the start of the conflict, so that's one way the country's being affected. Lister pointed out that Syria, perhaps ironically, is debatably at its most stable stage as the rest of the region is in flames. Take a listen.
And of course, within the context of a historic and almost unprecedented regional conflict, it should be noted that Syria has actually experienced its most stable 2 weeks on record throughout the past nearly 14 years of conflict. And that path of stabilization hasn't, again, for now, been affected by the trajectory of regional conflict. Of course, the risk of that continues, particularly looking at the Lebanese border and the role of Hezbollah. But until now, Syria actually continues to stabilize.
In terms of the Syrian response, it's mostly been diplomatic. I wrote an analysis on the topic for Al Monitor on Monday, featuring comments from Lister and Slim, and came to the conclusion that Syria has been focusing on expressing solidarity with Gulf states, criticizing Iran for its strikes on Arab countries in that region, and avoiding criticism of the US. I did some digging into statements by Shara and Foreign Minister Assad Ashebani, as well as state media coverage of the conflict. And basically, Syria has repeatedly expressed solidarity with the Gulf over the Iranian strikes, but has refrained from directly rebuking U.S. military actions. Here's Lister on what Syria is seeking to accomplish with its diplomatic posturing.
In the big picture, Syria is trying to use this as an opportunity to underline to the rest of the region that it can represent a stable part of the Middle East after so many years, that it can be a responsible actor. Ultimately, Syria wants to present itself as a core part of the regional diplomatic infrastructure. During the 12-day war, Syria was virtually silent. This time, the ministry is opting for a more public stance, focusing on criticizing Iran's targeting of regional states, whilst avoiding any public comment on the American and Israeli military actions. Ultimately, Syria is trying to position itself as a friendly partner and a loyal partner for the rest of the Middle East by focusing on the fact that it opposes Iran. Syria doesn't want to get in the middle of anything that the US and Israel has done. The only country in the region Syria is willing to accept hostility towards is Iran.
To his point on the diplomatic infrastructure, the Syrian foreign minister participated in the extraordinary Arab League session on the war on Sunday. The criticism of Iran coming out of Damascus is worth reflecting on for a minute. For years, under former President Bashar al-Assad, Syria was firmly in the Iranian orbit. But now, with the former rebel, Shara, leading the country, you have a government in Damascus that is openly critical of the Islamic Republic. This shift, of course, stems from the fact that Iran heavily backed Assad in his fight against rebels in the civil war. Now, Russia also backed Assad, and Shara's government has made overtures and developed ties with Russia. But that hasn't happened with Iran. As far as why Syria has been avoiding any direct criticism of the US, let's listen to what Slim said.
Syria has expressed support for Arab countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, and has condemned Iranian attacks on Saudi Arabia and the broader Gulf region. At the same time, Damascus has criticized the war in general terms by mostly referring to the threats it creates to regional stability, but doing so without directly targeting the United States, reflecting an effort by Damascus to avoid drawing Washington's ire. Economically, Syria cannot afford to be dragged into another war and remains focused on rebuilding. Maintaining workable relations with the United States is seen as important for securing future financial support from multilateral institutions as well as from regional countries.
Remember that the US recently removed sanctions on Syria that dated back to the Assad era and has been welcoming of Shara on the international stage despite his al-Qaeda past. Now, as for why Syria wants to support the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia in particular, it's largely a business decision. Saudi and Syrian entities signed more than $5 billion in deals just this past February. That was preceded by other significant investments from the kingdom, as well as Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Borders might be Syria's biggest security concern in the war. Hundreds of thousands of people in neighboring Lebanon are currently displaced amid heavy Israeli strikes targeting Hezbollah. Those strikes began after Hezbollah decided to renew its strikes on Israel just a day or so into the current war with Iran. Shara and Own discussed cooperation on border matters during the Tuesday call. And the same day, Syria accused the Iran-backed Hezbollah of firing shells into Syrian territory from Lebanon. Countering Hezbollah is important for Syria because Hezbollah, like Iran, fought for Assad in the civil war against the rebels. And Syria and Hezbollah have actually had a few clashes since Assad's fall in late 2024. Shara's public support for Own, who has repeatedly called for all weapons to be placed in the hands of the Lebanese state, comes as Hezbollah faces unprecedented pressure in Lebanon. When Hezbollah renewed its attacks on Israel, the Lebanese government actually declared the group's military activities illegal. 3 Hezbollah members were arrested last week on grounds of possessing illegal weapons, though they were released on bail on Monday. And as I mentioned earlier, Syria also sent reinforcements to the Iraqi border. It's worth noting that some Iran-backed militias in Iraq likewise fought for Assad in the Syrian civil war. Shara's past membership in al-Qaeda's Iraq affiliate has not won him many supporters in the Shiite-led Iraqi government. But the two countries have indicated a desire to work together, nonetheless, particularly on border security and countering the drug trade, since Shara took power. Shara and Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia as-Sudani held a call to discuss the regional situation on March 1st, just the day after the war broke out. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, Our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25, for a discount.
Okay, we're back. Another thing I'm following is the potential economic impacts to Syria from the war, especially when it comes to these sizable Gulf investments. Here's what Salim said about how the downturn in Gulf economies could affect Syria.
Syria's broader reconstruction strategy depends heavily on funding from Gulf states, especially Saudi Arabia and Qatar. However, as the conflict continues, pressure may grow within those countries to prioritize domestic spending over foreign investments, particularly in a fragile environment like Syria.
Syria is in desperate need of investment after years of war, and the World Bank estimates the cost of rebuilding Syria to be $216 billion. And in terms of the Gulf's priorities, they are dealing with significant infrastructure damage resulting from these Iranian strikes, as well as major disruptions to air travel, tourism, and related sectors. Salim added that Syria may turn to multilateral agencies if Gulf funds dry up, and prioritize simpler projects on water, electricity, and other necessities, as opposed to larger endeavors like the Saudi-funded rehabilitation of the Aleppo airport, for example. On the other hand, Lister said the Gulf investments in Syria could be somewhat insulated from the regional climate surrounding the war. Here's what he said.
While the global economic impact of the regional conflict, I think, is clear for all to see, I don't think we're seeing any direct evidence that it is impacting Syria, at least for now. The fact that much of the investment that has been promised to Syria over the past months has come from private sector sources, not from sovereign wealth funds, I think to a large extent insulates Syria from the potential economic effects. Although the extent to which the regional conflict persists, and of course the nature with which it eventually ends, will probably have a strong determining factor on the extent to which, if at all, the situation does affect Syria's economic prospects for recovery.
Okay, that concludes our episode. Thank you for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Remember to follow Al Monitor for all the developments happening with this war in the Middle East in general. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.